Hi there, I'm Shelley Gray from shelleygrayteaching.com, and welcome to this support video for the fraction station. So if you've used my other math stations in the past, perhaps the multiplication, addition, subtraction, or division stations, this video is probably going to be repetitive for you, and you most likely don't need to watch it since you already know how the math stations are going to run in your classroom. However, if you're a new user of any of my math stations, I highly encourage you to watch this video right through. It'll give you a great starting point for how to begin with your fraction station in your classroom. So basically this video is meant to take away the overwhelm. I know when you opened up that PDF file that you purchased, you probably thought, oh my goodness, this is a lot of information, and it really is. However, it's fairly simple once you get going through it. So I hope by watching this video, it'll take your overwhelm away and just make the whole process of setup a little bit easier for you. That being said, most likely you've arrived to this video through a link in a PDF file that you probably purchased off of Teachers Pay Teachers. If you just arrived here through YouTube and you're watching this, it is a support video for an existing resource called the Fraction Station. If you are interested in that product, you can find the link down below. With that, let's get started. So what is the fraction station? Well, the fraction station is a student-centered, self-paced approach for learning fractions. So students move through the levels at a level that is just right for them and a pace that is just right for them, and they are really the ones in charge of their learning. So it's a really popular approach for learning anything. Now, how did this all come about? Well, several years ago, in my first year teaching actually, I was trying to figure out a way that I could teach multiplication to my grade 3 and 4 class with a big variety of ability levels. So I developed this self-paced approach where students moved through levels at their own pace, mastering the multiplication facts as they went. It was a huge hit in my classroom. Students were begging me to do multiplication station, and eventually I made this available to other teachers around the world. And since then, thousands of people have used the multiplication station as well as my other stations for addition, subtraction, and division. And I've had hundreds of requests for stations that follow the same format for other topic areas like fractions or place value. So I'm really excited to be introducing the fraction station to you today. So the fraction station is ideal for differentiation in your classroom. When you're struggling to appeal to all the different levels of learners in your classroom, this is a great approach because the students are moving through at a pace that suits their unique abilities. So it really is a great way to learn and a great way to teach. Now, why is it so popular? So why are you going to have students begging to do this? Well, it's because it incorporates a few basic principles of student engagement. And those basic principles are fun, freedom, power, and choice. So with this approach, students really have freedom to move at their own pace. They are in charge of their learning, so they have the power. And it's a really fun approach, as you're going to see through this video. Now, as you will work with the fraction station, I want you to remember two big goals. And the first big goal that I have with anything that I teach in my classroom is student engagement. So when students are engaged and when they're having fun, they can learn at maximum levels. So that is the big goal with this fraction station, is to make sure that students are engaged and they're having fun. The other big goal is working to their full potential. So as you know, you probably have some students who already have a background knowledge of fractions and some are going to have no idea what it means. You want to be able to teach all of those unique students at their own level and make sure that they're all reaching their full potential. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a broad overview of what is going to happen in your classroom during fraction station time and exactly how this is going to work. So basically for supplies, you need a large box. Now I used a plastic one that I got from Walmart. It holds hanging folders actually, so I used hanging folders for this one. You don't have to use the hanging folders. You can even use a cardboard box if you want. It doesn't really matter as long as it holds letter-sized file folders. Now for this station, and as you'll see later, I used two tubs actually. I have the big one for my fraction station for the main activity sheets that are included. And then I used a second tub this time for the end of level activities. Now if you've used my other stations before, this one is a little bit different in that there's an activity for every single level. So that's why I put the activities in a whole separate box, just to keep both boxes a little bit neat and tidier, since this one has a lot of hands-on stuff in it. So basically, you're going to have these boxes, and within the boxes, you have all of your file folders. Now, the file folders are arranged by levels. So there's 9 levels. This example shows you the 3rd grade fraction station. So yours might be a tiny bit different depending on which grade level you have. So I like to use different colored folders for every level. It just makes it more visual for the students. Now, students are going to work through each level in the box. So they're going to start with level 1, and they're going to pull out the folder that says 1A and 1B. And in that folder, there'll be an activity sheet that they complete. And they come back to the folder, they grab the answer keys that you're going to make, print off for them, and they self-check, they correct. They put a little check on their assessment tracker, which I'll show you in a few minutes. And then they come back and they get the next activity, and they work through the entire level just like that. It should be very self-sufficient for them. You are going to have no marking to do. They're doing all of it. So you are really going to be able to sit back and take on more of a role of facilitator rather than teacher, which I promise you you're really going to love. Now, when they get to the end of a level, they are going to ask you for a test. And all this is, it's a very informal quiz just to make sure that they understand the concepts that they learned in this level. Now, I'll talk more about the test later on as well. But I just do want to give you the broad overview. And that's just going to repeat through the entire station. They're going to do the activities, do the hands-on activity, ask for a test. And then they'll go on to the next level, do the activities, the hands-on activity, and ask for a test. And they'll do that through all 9 levels. And then at the very end, there's a fraction project that the students will complete. Now, a common question with my other math stations is, do I have to have all the students start at the very beginning if they already know those concepts? My answer is typically yes. I like to have students start right at the very beginning. The reason is because the first few levels are intended as a confidence booster. So you're going to find that most students probably speed through the first couple levels fairly quickly and easily, but that's a good thing because we want to make our students feel successful right off the bat, and then it'll pay off later when the concepts get a little bit harder because they'll already have that confidence, that feeling of being successful inside them, and they'll be ready for a little bit of a bigger challenge. So I do encourage you to start all students at the very beginning, regardless of where they're at in their ability levels. Okay, so as far as assembly, I do encourage you to take a couple hours. This will take you, 2 to 4 hours, I'd say, to set up. I really encourage you to get it all done in one sitting. And before you have students working on the station, I like to have the entire thing prepped and ready to go. Now, some teachers I know have asked me in the past with other stations, is it okay if I just get the first couple levels ready and then have students start? Of course, the ultimate decision is up to you. I do like to have it ready to go because you will have some students that are quicker than the others, and I just like to always make sure that those students have something to do. So if the whole station is done, you are complete. You don't have to think about it anymore. Your prep is done for probably the next 1 to 2 months on this particular station. So that's why I really encourage you just to take a few hours on a weekend or after school and just get it finished. All right, so let's take a look inside the actual station. So as you can see, there's a label on the front which is included in your file. You can print that off. Now you might find, depending on the number of students in your class, the size of box you need will vary. So this is a fairly big one. You might even have to split your stuff into 2 boxes because inside each folder you're going to have enough activity sheets for every student in your classroom. So just depending on your numbers, that'll impact the size of box that you need. So inside the actual fraction station box where the activity sheets are, you're going to need about 40 folders. And as I mentioned before, I buy the boxes of folders that have 4 different colors in them. So for me, I did level 1 is all red, level 2 is blue, level 3 is yellow. And that's way it's just a little bit more visual for the students. But if you just have regular folders that are not even colored, I mean, that's going to work completely fine. This is just kind of the ideal for me. Now let's look inside a folder. So I'm going to take out the 3A and 3B folder. And as you can see, I labeled mine on the tab 3A and 3B. So that tells students that inside this folder, they're going to find 2 activity sheets, 3A and 3B. So inside the folder, I've got the activity sheets paper clipped together. So there's 3A on one side, as you can see in the corner, and 3B on the other side. So and I keep them in a paper clip to keep them neat and tidy. And then also in that folder are the answer keys. This is really important. I highly encourage you having the students self-check their own work. It leads to greater metacognition, I find, and it's just nice for you. You don't need the extra marking. Your students should be doing more work, not you. So I laminate the answer keys. First of all, I put them on colored paper. and then I laminate them. I find that the colored paper makes them stand out from everything else so that students can identify these as answer keys right away. And really, I highly encourage you to laminate them because these are going to be used a lot by your students. They'll be in and out of the folders all the time. So the answer keys, as you can see, 3A, sorry, wrong side, 3A and 3B. So that's what's inside each folder. Now, students should know how to organize their folders, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later about expectations, but I always tell my students that I expect the folders to stay in order. So the activity sheets first, and then the answer keys in order, 3A and then 3B. And when students get a folder out of the box, I like to have them take the entire folder out when they're digging in for an answer key or even an activity sheet, and I get them to take it out again when they're putting things back. I find that that leads to less disorganization. Sometimes an answer key might get slipped into a wrong folder or something. I find if they take the entire folder out, put their stuff in, and then put the entire folder back in, it helps that a little bit. But these are all just little things that you will figure out along the way, of course. Now, as I mentioned before, for this particular station, I used 2 tubs. So I used the one for the fraction station activity sheets. I used a different tub for the end of level activities. I haven't done this in past math stations, so if you've used my other math stations, this is going to be a little bit different. And I mean, you don't have to do this. You can include the activities in your main tub as well. I just figured it might be easier to have a separate one. So these are all the hands-on activities that come at the very end of each level. And so what I did here was I just put them in folders, and inside the folder I have the bags with the recording sheets, the task cards, or whatever materials are included for that activity. So now this is where you have to decide if you want to make just one of each activity or if you want to have maybe 2 available for each end of level activity. If you are going to have your students working in small groups where maybe only 4 to 5 students are working on the fraction station at one time, I think you'll probably be okay with just having 1 copy of each activity. However, if you plan to do this as a whole class activity, and maybe you plan on having 25 students working on the fraction station at any one time, you might want to consider making 2 or 3 sets of each end of level activity, just so that you don't have students hanging around waiting for somebody else to finish before they can get the materials. Okay, so let's talk about introducing the fraction station in your classroom. So how I like to introduce any math station to my students is in small groups. So I prefer to have 4 to 5 students at one time with me looking at the fraction station for the first time, while all the other students are engaged in something else independent that they can be doing on their own so that we're not getting interrupted. So I like to do this because I want to be able to give my students the chance to experience the fraction station before they are expected to be working on it independently. I like them to be able to touch and feel it and maybe do a couple activities out of it with me at the very first before I expect them to do it all on their own. So that's just my particular preference. Now, expectations are really, really, really important. Imagine how crazy this could get if you don't outline your expectations and you've got 25 or 30 students using this and not using it how you want them to use it. It could become pretty disorganized pretty fast. However, if you take the time, the 20 minutes or so that it takes to outline exactly how you expect this to be kept, I promise you your students can do it and you will not have to reorganize this at all. They can take care of this themselves. Now, when I outline my expectations, I outline every little thing that I expect. So I told you before about the folders, how I like to have the answer keys and the activity sheets organized. I actually give students a chance to practice with paper clips, like taking a paper clip off the papers and putting it back on, or slipping a sheet out without taking the paper clip off, because chances are a lot of your students don't know even how to use a paper clip. They've never really needed to use one before. So I go through every little thing. The resealable bags that I use for the activities, I would let them have the chance to practice closing those up, practice counting the task cards and making sure that they have all the things that are supposed to be included in that bag. So take the time, it'll pay off in the end. I know it feels like a lot of time to use up front, but it's just like classroom procedures. It always pays off in the end. So take that time in small groups to introduce the station to your students. Okay, so I've touched on these points throughout this video so far, but I just want to go over a typical day in your classroom when you're using the fraction station. What can you expect? What is this going to look like and sound like in your classroom? So as I mentioned before, my preference is to use this as a center activity or a workstation in your classroom. I find that when there's 25 students using it at one time, you're going to have a lot of little hands in here, which personally I'm not a huge fan of. I like to limit it to maybe 4 to 6 students working on this station at any one time. So that's why I like to set it up as a workstation in your classroom, so that maybe you have 4 or 5 groups around your classroom working on various tasks. One of those stations is for the fraction station. I also like to limit math stations to 15 to 20 minutes tops. You want to end when students are still highly engaged, rather than giving them a chance to get to the point where they're getting bored or frustrated or just tired of doing the same thing. So I always like to end on a high note, end while everyone is still having a great time and while engagement is still super high. So that's why I like to do it as a workstation. So what you're going to expect is that students are going to be getting up and down from their desks. If you've used my other stations, this is nothing new. So they're going to be getting up and down, going to the boxes to get their activities, get their answer keys, self-check, put their stuff back. And that's a great thing. Movement is a great thing in your classroom, but again, this is where expectations come in. So as long as you are very clear that when they need to get up for an activity, they don't stop to visit with friends or anything, they go straight to the box, straight back, and they're just doing their jobs. So movement is a good thing in this case. You can also expect students to be approaching you at the end of a level for their test. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, at the end of every level, there's a test. And now students are going to have their own assessment tracker. It looks like this. It's included in your PDF file. And this tells them when it's time for their test. So they'll do, for instance, level 1, they'll do 1A, B, C, and D. Those are the activity sheets. Then they'll do the activity for level 1. And then it's time for the level 1 test. So this is a great time to encourage metacognition. So does your student feel ready for a test? Does she feel like she's mastered the concepts in that level? If so, she comes and asks you for her test for level 1. And as I mentioned before, please keep this test super informal. Don't even call it a test if you don't have to. You can just call it a short assessment or something like that. Now I've included these assessment task cards for you. I put mine on a ring so that you can hang them on a bulletin board beside your desk or something. Now, when you do the level 1 test, there's 4 activities to assess each student. So you can just flip to the level 1 area and quickly go through the 4 task cards that will assess the level 1 concepts. Some of these require a dry erase marker, but most of them are just a simple oral quiz. This should take you no longer than 1 to 2 minutes with each student. If you feel like you need to add more questions to get a proper assessment, then by all means do that. But these task cards should give you a fairly good overview of where your student is at. Now, if you find that they mastered the concept, then they go ahead and move on to the next level. You'll give them a sticker if you want, or they can shade in a spot on their assessment tracker. You also give them a badge for their passport, which you probably saw in the PDF file, and they move on to the next level. Now, let's say they don't meet your expectations, so they just didn't quite have it, they just weren't quite where you were hoping them to be. You can just ask them to go back to their desk. There's no negative consequences. This is really important. Kids shouldn't feel like they failed if they don't answer the questions right. They just go back and practice, or maybe you give them a quick mini lesson, or they use some other activities that you might have in your classroom, and they come back to you when they feel ready. So it's really informal. It's not a negative thing, no high pressure. I've told this story in my other videos, so if you've watched my other videos, you've probably heard it already. But when I was doing the multiplication station in my classroom years ago, I had one student, high achiever, who just buckled under pressure every time, and tears would be in his eyes almost when he had to be asking me for his test, which he aced every time, of course, but it was just really, really hard on him. So what I did for him is we walked the hallways while I quickly asked him the multiplication facts from that level, and that worked for him. So keep in mind that you might have to change how you do things for different students in your classroom. Now, when I talk about expectations as well, your expectations also might change for different students in your classroom. So for some students, you're going to expect that they can, answer these questions fairly quickly and really accurately. For other ones, you might have to give them a little bit of help, and maybe that meets your expectations for that particular student. So just keep in mind that your expectations might change a little bit for different students in your classroom when it comes to the assessments. Now, that's the formal assessment piece of the station. So once you've done your assessment, students will complete a page in their passport. If you're going to use the passports, they'll shade in a spot on their tracker and they'll move to the next level. And that's going to happen over and over and over and over again. That's how the fraction station is going to work in your classroom. As far as informal assessment, which I personally think is the most important type of assessment, I have included a couple of trackers in there for you as a teacher as well. Informal assessment is going to be happening all the time in your classroom as you circulate. You might stop and ask students questions, see where their understanding is at. Informal assessment is going to be how you drive your future instruction. So do you see that a student is struggling with numerators and denominators? That's going to be where you are going to stop and do a mini lesson with that student, or maybe with a small group of 3 students. Mini lessons might also happen. You might notice that all of your students now have passed level 3. So you might do a quick mini lesson for level 4. Now for some students it's going to be new learning. For some it's going to be a review if they're already on to level 6 or 7. That's totally okay. So that's where you need to be the judge of how you're going to integrate mini lessons into this station. You also might notice that you have some students asking to work in partners. This, of course, is up to your own discretion. Personally, in math, I like to encourage partner work. I feel like it encourages mathematical discussion between students, which I always think is really great. So that's up to you. But personally, I do let students work in partners, even if they're at different levels. Your fast finishers, what are you going to do with them? So you will have some students that finish this way ahead of others, which is great. That's how it is designed, for them to work at their own pace. What are you going to do with those fast finishers? That's where you also need to have some kind of plan. Please don't make the fast finishers your helpers in your classroom. They should move on to some kind of enrichment. You might give them a fraction project to work on, or some other math concept even. So I do want you to think what you're going to do with those fast finishers as well, because you will encounter that after a couple weeks most likely. Okay, and you also might be wondering if you can just use all the materials in this PDF file without setting it up as the stations. Absolutely, you can use all of the worksheets, activities, hands-on activities as you see fit in your classroom, and I think your students will still benefit a lot. However, I do really feel that this approach works. It's instant differentiation, and it is set up to highly engaged students. So I do really encourage you to try the station format if you can. That's all I have for you. I hope this video has helped. Please make sure that you go through that PDF file carefully. I've included a checklist that's going to help you in your setup so that you know what you need to prepare before you get started. And lastly, I just wanted to let you know, please feel free to contact me through my Facebook page or my blog, and just let me know how you're doing with your fraction station. I love to hear from teachers that are using my materials. Thank you so much. Have a great day.